Hello everyone and welcome to the Cult Movie Podcast, Cult Potato. As always, I am your host, Campion, and joining me, my ever-faithful co-host, Mr. Grady Hooker. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
City had an intro.
Happy birthday, Grady.
This part is just releases way later.
Why would I sing that, Grady?
I don't know, Campion. According to the release schedule, this comes out on the 26th of March.
But when are we recording it, Grady?
No idea. I think some random day in February.
Oh, just a random day of no particular importance.
Most days have no particular importance.
Well, they do to me, Grady. They do to me.
You love every day equally.
Well, love's a strong word. But, yes, anyway.
Those Thursdays, man, they suck.
This is Grady's, what is it, your 42nd birthday?
43rd,
today.
get it right, bud.
Whoa, hang on, I'm still caught up on last year, man. Yes.
COVID's going by.
It's how it feels sometimes. Got any plans for the big old B-Day?
Recording a podcast episode with my favorite podcast co-host ever.
Oh, wow. Okay, I bet the other guy from Wrestling Roundup's feeling pretty left out right now.
Look, Josh will never listen to this. We'll be good.
Anyway, Grady, for this special birthday episode, which we totally intended to record on your birthday, and it didn't fall on it because of various delays in other weeks. What do we record? What are we talking about for your birthday, Grady?
I kind of wish this wasn't my birthday episode, but it is Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Yes, of course, the British comedy classic done by the very, very famous and much beloved Monty Python sketch comedy group, consisting, of course, of Graham Chapman, John Cleese, Terry Gilliam, Eric Idle, Terry Jones, and Michael Palin. Well known for their sketch comedy show, Monty Python's Flying Circus. Probably one of the most well-known sketch comedy groups out there. I struggle pretty hard to think of who's above them. Maybe SNL, but they've had so many different lineups over the years and they change out so frequently. I think Python's like the most consistent when it comes to sketch comedy groups.
Yeah, if you're talking about a group that like stuck together and put out content solidly with each other, and that core group you're talking about, then yeah, Monty Python's probably number one in that case.
Yeah. Okay, so this film released 3rd of April 1975, produced by the Pythons themselves. Grady, what did you think of this movie?
I'm gonna finally do it. I'm
Yep.
I'm gonna say a swear word. Because my notes on this is, what the am I watching?
Now I have to ask before we kick this off proper. Have you watched a lot of Python before? Have you seen this movie? Are you familiar with how familiar are you with the Python's work in general?
I've seen some of their stuff outside of the sketch comedy group, like John Cleese, obviously, but in terms of them as a comedy group, this was my first exposure, and I had not previously seen this movie going into it at all.
Oh, wow. Okay, then that I guess is one hell of an introduction.
My girlfriend one of my partners was so excited to do this. She was pushing for it. She was like, do Monty Python. They're the reason I put this on the list. And then it came along, and she had regrets. There was a lot of cringe on the couch. And if it wasn't for the fact that it was the podcast, I don't know if we would have made it through the whole movie.
Okay, so is she familiar with Python's work? Like, had she seen...
She had seen this movie in younger life.
Let me guess. She saw it as a kid, thought it was the funniest thing ever, then rewatching it as an adult, she has second thoughts.
Yep.
Yeah, guess how I felt, Grady?
Did you possibly enjoy it as a child and then rewatch it as an adult and think it was a bad idea?
I want to make this abundantly clear. I do. When I was a kid, right, in high school, I loved Monty Python. I thought it was the funniest thing ever. In fact, I distinctly remember trying to form like a sketch comedy group from a film and TV class and filming like sketches and stuff that we put on YouTube. They weren't funny at the time. They definitely aren't funny now. I can tell you that much. I have seen a lot of Python. I've seen this movie multiple times. Thought it was the funniest thing ever as a kid. But as it's not as funny now that I'm an adult, and I feel sad and old, and regret. I just feel regret, Grady. I just feel sad and old. As
I was watching this, like, obviously we've had a couple of, I wouldn't even say a couple. I think we've had one really rough episode with Assassination Nation. Idiocracy got a little weird in there in terms of some of the stuff and some of the subjects it touched. This one is the first one I've come out of going, I do not want to watch that movie again. I have no interest in this movie. And I knew that was going to make it for a spicy podcast.
It's a 70s British comedy, so I am not surprised. Especially since it's Python. Like, I found it very difficult to find so many of the jokes funny. I think a good number of them is because they're just jokes that I've heard before, because I've seen this movie so many times, and I've rewatched a lot of the famous bits of this movie on YouTube so many times, and that it just isn't funny. There were a couple of jokes in there that really got me to laugh, but they were the ones that I had just forgotten. Like the part with where they have Terry Gilliam as Terry Jones as Sir Bedivere, and they're talking about weighing the witch. That got me to laugh because I forgot a good chunk of that sequence. It's just the whole she must be a witch. She turned me into a newt. I got better. That got a rise out of me. That was really funny to me. Was there anything great in this film that actually got you to laugh?
Funny you say that. I have 5 notes on this movie. I already said one of them. And one of my notes is about my biggest laugh during this film. Okay. There was a scene, I don't remember when, but what commenced was a 3-way handshake. And then from the cheap seats, I said, "What, are you John Key?" That's a New Zealand joke for y'all out there. And it got the biggest laugh out of the night from the entire couch of people. My horrible little NZ politics throwaway joke got a bigger belly laugh than any of the jokes in this movie.
Yeah. This is a unique situation for us because we've had films on here that I've liked and that you haven't liked, or something that, because I think Tremors I was really high on and you weren't. I think that Assassination Nation, I was definitely down on that.
Yeah.
You were. Did you really like that film? Because you were definitely higher on it than I was.
100%. I suggested to people, so I'm pretty high on it.
Yeah. I think this is the one where we're both kind of down on it, but to different degrees and for different reasons. So it's just like, because for me, it's just depressing because I don't find this movie funny anymore. When I did once upon a time. But there's still a few things. I could see things in there that I still think are really funny. I think the part at Castle Anthrax, when Michael Palin's going through and there's all the nuns there, I still think that's really funny. Because it's just... it's difficult for me to articulate it, Grady. I'm just very sad because when I was a kid, this was the funniest thing on earth. And I sat through most of this movie dead silent. And it just made me depressed.
Yeah. It's a weird one, right? Because much like you, I guess, through high school, it was probably you that I'm about to reference. It would be constantly suggested. It was talked up as the funniest shit on earth. And I always just, nah, whatever, and ignored it. And then obviously one of my partners comes out again and is going, yeah, it's awesome, watch it. And then I sit down to watch it, and I just sort of look around the room and just be like, shame. All of you wanted me to watch this. What is this horrible garbage on my TV right now?
again, I wouldn't say it sucks. It's just not. Because have you ever watched a movie that's other people say is really funny, and then you watch it, and okay, not apart from this one, obviously, but and something that, and you watch it and you just don't laugh at all. Have you ever been able to see something that you don't find funny, but you can see why someone else would find it funny, or you can see how someone else would be able to connect to this? So you don't think it's bad comedy, you just know that it's comedy that doesn't connect with you. Have you ever felt that before?
Yeah, I'm very aware that my sense of humor won't line up with everybody's. I think generally it lines up with yours pretty well. Probably the same with my partners and most of the people we hung out with at high school. But I just feel like everybody's sense of humor has evolved since then, I guess. We're no longer our 15, 16-year-old selves.
Yeah. And I felt that way with a number of things. I remember that, what was that Netflix show? I think it was like Kimmy Schmidt, Unbreakable. A show that was critically lauded all the way to Kilimanjaro and back. And I watched 2 seasons of it, laughed like once or twice. Didn't find it funny, but I could see why other people found it funny, because these jokes just weren't hitting me, but I could see that it wasn't an unfunny show. Here, I can see why the jokes are funny, because I remember laughing at it, and I remember being able to connect with these as a kid. And I don't want to say, oh, this is only, for kids, this is just for, children, this is just lowbrow baby humor. Because I know a lot of adults find this really, really funny. Like, they did, like, a live comedy special at, like, the Hollywood Bowl, and the entire audience is just adults. Because, well, okay, for starters, it's all drinking and smoking, and they're doing weed and stuff, so of course, they're not going to have kids there. And quite a few of the quote-unquote investors on this film were grown-ass adults. They just thought pythons were funny, and they just wanted to throw some money at them. This is specifically, I think it was like Led Zeppelin was one of the big donators for this film. Hang on, I've got some of the other ones here.
He has facts, otherwise it's just going to be us sitting here bashing a film for 20-odd minutes.
Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Jethro Tull, sorry. So quite a few, they were big fans, and so they put a lot of money into it. So maybe it could be like a cultural thing, because it is Britain, which is different to us, and it was the 70s, that's like 50 years ago at this point. So I don't know. It just makes me sad that this is something that I'm unable to connect to anymore. It just makes me feel dead inside.
Look, I'm going to look at it from a slightly different perspective, and maybe you'll agree, maybe you won't agree with this, but as you said, we tried doing the whole YouTube comedy thing through high school. Some videos of varying quality, let's put it that way.
Varying, I'm pretty sure it had one consistent level of quality.
Garbage, but yes, varying levels of garbage. Some of it really stunk, and some of it was tolerable a little bit. And some of it was broccoli. Whereas this film almost feels like something we would have made in high school. And maybe that's because that's where our humor was, and that's where we were trying to go with stuff like that. But it feels like that sort of disjointed, just random, almost completely mini-story things that have quick-witted, bam, here's a joke, bam, here's a throwback, bam, 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 bam. Like, it feels like it could have been written by a group of high schoolers trying to make a movie, trying to make something that's fun, but somebody who doesn't have filmmaking experience, somebody who doesn't make a movie per se. It is, I guess the new school equivalent would be a group of YouTubers creating a movie that's just a bunch of sketches stitched together.
I challenge you to find a YouTuber-made comedy film that's funnier than this one. Like, I know we're pretty down on this. I can guarantee all of the YouTube comedy ones are exponentially worse.
I just get this as the vibe. This is the 70s version of a YouTuber comedy.
Yeah. You're surprisingly close, because how this film is structured, there's no real... They're trying to find the Grail, but that's about it. It's more or less just a bunch of medieval-themed comedy sketches loosely strung together to form the film's plot. And so, and you are right that they actually didn't have any real filmmaking experience, because the film was directed by two of the Pythons, specifically Terry Gilliam and Terry Jones, the two Terrys, and that because they'd come from television, and so they knew how to do television, but film is a much different beast, especially with the limited resources they had to work with on this movie. And the high school vibe, I actually do get that, because maybe not high school, but if you want to just bump that up a little to university, because a lot of the Pythons went to university together. I think half of them went to like Oxford, the other half went to Cambridge, and that's where they got their start in comedy, and they sort of had their own little comedy troupes and stuff that they had in university, sort of making this stuff. So I think you've actually hit the nail on the head pretty well with that.
Yeah, I wrote down, we're running out of my notes, I wrote down, this movie is better as a series of random references and memes than it is a movie. And it really feels like that's what it is. It's things that, like, some of the stuff from this is infinitely quotable. It still makes its way into, general lexicon nowadays. But that's really all it's got. There's nothing stitching it together, in my opinion. Some cool bits here and there. Like, I love me a good throwback. And there's some amazing throwbacks in this from stuff that you saw an hour ago coming back to be important, but
yeah,
man, it was the in-between is really where it feels let down.
Yeah, and I think the Pythons even sort of are kind of down on this film. Not that they hate it, but they don't consider this like their best work. In fact, they I think they consider Life of Brian, the film they did after this, to be significantly better, because that one had like an actual narrative and an actual character that you could follow throughout the film. Are you familiar with Life of Brian? Do you know
I have not
about
seen it, no.
Do you know anything about it? Like
No. Zero. Okay. Bagel.
Life of Brian is a film about it's set in, I think, Jerusalem, Israel, sort of that sort of area. It's about a guy born on the same day as Jesus, and he gets mistaken as the Messiah, and so it just kind of follows of him just trying to lead a normal life, and people keep mistaking him for Jesus.
Yeah, I can see that being something that's, an actual film, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think because of that premise, it's just a lot easier for them to get jokes out of it. I remember there was this great... I'm a lot higher on Life of Brian, like even before rewatching it today, I was always a lot higher on Life of Brian than this, because it just had a lot more clever jokes on it. That, and I think Life of Brian genuinely... I rewatched it on YouTube, but from what I remember... Life of Brian has probably one of, if not the best endings to a movie, or at least one of my favorites. This one, whilst it is kind of funny as like a bit of kind of like a one-off joke, having the police show up before the big epic battle and then just ending the film, it's funny in retrospect, but it really pissed me off when I saw it as a kid, because I wanted the plot to have a resolution, but it just ends.
Yeah.
Whereas spoilers for Life of Brian, a film that came out a little under 50 years ago. The film ends with Brian being crucified, and everyone on the crucifixes just kind of being like, they all sing "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life" together. That's where that song comes from. It's from the ending of Life of Brian.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a sad, but it's also at the same time a really funny ending.
To be fair, if you're talking about the actual ending of this film, it's 40 minutes of black screen. Sorry, 4 minutes of black screen. Which, to me, highlighted my last note that I've got written down, that this movie felt like it has Family Guy syndrome, where the jokes just go on a little too long sometimes. And they start beating a dead horse by the end of it. Like, I'll tell you now, I didn't stick around for those 4 minutes. I got up, I went over to my video player, and I skipped it. And just to see if there was anything. And And there was a few other moments where it was just like, okay, I get it. This is the joke. Let's move on. And I guess maybe because of the lengths of a movie or what they were trying to make or the scope of what they were doing, they had to kind of stretch it out so that the scene would be longer, or like the opening credits for me went on too long. I get the joke. Cool. Let's move on. And then you do the joke a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time. And I'm like, okay, I'm sick of these opening credits. Just start the damn movie.
I do think a lot of that does have to do with evolving taste in comedy, because, again, this was made back in the 70s, and no one did jokes like that back then.
Yeah.
In fact, I would honestly call Family Guy a very, very poor imitation of the sort of Python-esque style of comedy. Because, you know, they were kind of breaking new grounds on a lot of things and a lot of the way they did their jokes. But unfortunately, because we've seen, you know, so many people take that and then kind of refine it or rework it in different ways, when you see something like that, it just isn't funny anymore. Like, have you ever watched Seinfeld? Have you ever sat down and watched it?
I've not sat down to watch an episode, no.
Okay. What about like the early seasons of The Simpsons? Have you ever watched any of that recently?
Not recently. I did watch it around the time when I was a child, so I'll have those rose-tinted glasses. When it first came out. Yeah. A lot of because Seinfeld is held as, you know, one of the greatest sitcoms ever. It's the one that established a lot of the tropes in sitcoms that we have today. A lot of that comedy just isn't funny anymore. Like, Seinfeld really does not play to a modern audience. Like, and it's less to do with like the actual jokes themselves. It's more that just, it feels like even though you've never seen it before, it feels like you've seen this joke done before. Gotcha. Because so many people afterwards have kind of ripped that off, or they've been able to take what they've done and then rework it into a way that's more palatable for a modern audience. And I get those same feelings watching this. Like, again, I don't hate this movie. I still like it, and I still appreciate what it's done. Especially since this was, you know, because this is such a beloved classic. It has, like, a 79, a 97 on Rotten Tomatoes, or something crazy like that. It's a well-beloved film, and I can't really be hate it or be as down on it as you are. But at the same time, I barely laughed. I can count on one hand the number of times I laughed. Yeah, it was weird. It felt like, I guess, a letdown is the easiest way to describe this movie. And I'm trying not to be super harsh on it. It's just because of the audience I was in at the time and all of the people who'd suggested it to me leading up to this, right? And when you're sitting here and then all of a sudden, like, the Knights Who Say Knee show up and everyone's like, oh my god, it's this one, it's this scene, you're gonna love it. And then the scene happens and they go, oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
And you just sort of sit there going, that's what you were hyping up? That's what you were waiting for? Or they finally get to the bridge and the unladen swallow comes back around full circle and I'm like, man, if you didn't know this joke by this time, you know this. This has been memed to all hell.
Yeah, it's one of those things where its reputation really does affect your viewing experience of it. It's a bit like trying to watch something like Citizen Kane or The Godfather. When you build something up as the greatest thing of all time, you're gonna be disappointed when you finally get around to watching it. I kind of feel the same way whenever I try to play Deus Ex, because it's been built up as like the greatest video game ever made, and then I play it. And of course, it isn't the greatest video game ever made. It's because it's just a game. So it kind of ruins your whole experience.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's the whole reason. I do genuinely think that even if it hadn't been built up for you, Grady, I still think your reaction would more or less be the same. You may have laughed at a couple more things. You may have found a few things quite a bit more funny. But still, I still think both of us would have had more or less the same reaction if we went into this blind.
Yeah, I don't think it's getting an above average response from either of us regardless. It just may be less negative. And I totally do not condone, especially here in New Zealand where it's still completely illegal, illicit substance usage. But I feel like this movie could be 10 times funnier if you were sitting on the couch high with a bag of Doritos.
Yeah. For me, I just have a lot of attachments because there's a lot of nostalgia for me for a lot of Python stuff. Like, I remember in high school, we used to play this game called Flux, which had a Monty Python edition to it. And that was so much fun, because like, some of the rules were just like, oh, you had to quote, like, a Monty Python scene, or you had to sing a Monty Python song, and everyone would break out into singing, like, Every Sperm is Sacred, or the Lumberjack song, you know? And it's, yeah, so for me, I think a lot of my positive feelings is a lot of nostalgia, because it gave me a lot of good memories as a kid. Like, I used to be able to do the Argument Clinic sketch by memory.
And you may not have, but have you gone back and watched other Python stuff that is not the Holy Grail?
Yes.
So does that hit, or does that not hit? I guess is a genuine question.
It doesn't hit.
So all of Python doesn't hit.
I watched the show. I watched Flying Circus. I still didn't laugh, Grady.
Okay. I just wanted to see. Maybe the Holy Grail was a bad set to look at, but if it's most, if not all, of Python stuff, okay.
Maybe I don't know. Maybe if I just set you down, we watch some of the best sketches on YouTube. Maybe you'll find them funny. But I sincerely doubt that.
And I feel bad because this is the kind of brand of humor, I guess, that defined a whole section. You know, we, as you say, so carefully tried to imitate it basically throughout high school. And yeah, I guess it's kind of more annoying that it isn't funny, which seems to be your response. Like when I ask, have you seen any of the other stuff, and you're like, no, it's still not funny. It's like you're kind of disappointed in, I think, yourself more than the Python stuff.
That's a great way to put it. Because I've watched other things that I liked as a kid, like Futurama, still really goddamn funny. Community, still really goddamn funny. Monty Python's Flying Circus, nothing. It is. I want to feel the same way I did as a kid, but I can't, and that's frustrating.
So the real question is, in high school, why didn't we create the next Futurama instead of the next Monty Python?
Because animating's hard, Grady. Animating is really hard.
Yeah, I think that is it. I think this movie can be summed up for me in one word, which is just disappointing. Whether that be disappointing in the movie and its humor, or disappointing in us no longer finding this brand of humor funny, just an overall disappointing viewing experience.
Yeah, and it's great because it's the same thing happened last week when we did Princess Bride, and it's just like, why aren't they... Brady, do we just not get these old classics? Are we the problem?
It's the Skinner meme, right? The Simpsons Skinner meme.
But it's the opposite, because this is older stuff and we're younger. It's just the opposite.
And it doesn't let up for a little while. We've got a couple on the schedule coming up, a couple more older movies still. And I'm really hoping when we get to a couple episodes from now, this stuff isn't all completely and utterly ruined because we rewatched it.
It can't be, because, remember we watched The Thing? That's an old movie, and we love that. That was a good movie.
That was a good movie. Labyrinth was good.
Labyrinth was also a good movie. See, we watch good movies.
It's just an absolute crapshoot to figure out whether it's going to be a good movie or a ruined legacy.
The last one we did, what was it? Charlie and the Chocolate Factory?
Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, please.
Willy Wonka, yes. That was a good movie.
Yeah.
See, there are good old movies that we like. It's just very sad when we come across one that we don't.
Yeah. I think, as you say, it's high scores for everything. Like, if you search up comedy movies, this thing's always super high up in people's personal rankings, and I just challenge everybody who's putting it that high up. Like, there's no shame in enjoying it, but go rewatch it before you put it that high. Don't just nostalgia pick it that high.
Yeah. Although, to be fair, a lot of the people giving these big awards and stuff to this movie are people who saw it when it first came out, so it might hit differently for them. In fact, I would say that when it comes to older movies, comedy is always the one that's probably not going to hold up as well, because comedy is such a difficult thing to get right. And then when you separate it by decades, like, it's so rare that you get, like, a timeless comedy that is still funny. Because, a lot of, I think a really good example is a lot of Shakespeare's works were straight up comedies. And I don't mean comedy as, because, there's comedy and tragedy. I don't mean comedy as in, oh, hey, it's just a positive story. Some of them were legit meant to be like gut busters, like really, really funny. Like I think, what was it, Much Ado About Nothing? Was a straight up laugh out loud comedy. I saw a production of it, doesn't hit. Like it was written like 500 to 600 years ago. It is not going to appeal to them. It's not going to be. It's interesting as a play purely because it's a Shakespearean play, so it's still a decent watch. But like I'm not going to bust a gut like I would watching Hot Fuzz or something like that.
Or Shaun of the Dead, maybe.
Or Shaun of the Dead, yes.
Wink,
yes.
wink, nudge, nudge. Later on.
God, stop quoting Python at me.
But hey, not every movie that we do a podcast on has to be a banger.
Yeah. I think, well, because neither of us are really trashing this movie. We're not saying this is a terrible movie, what a waste of time. It's more like, this just doesn't work for either of us. And I imagine for a lot of modern viewers, it's not going to work for them either.
No, I just wish I could have sat High School Campion and High School Grady in a room and just watched them watching it.
Yeah. Because I did legitimately find all of Python's stuff hilarious when I was a teenager. Like I genuinely loved all of it. Okay, I say all of it. There was a bunch of sketches in there that were actually pretty crap, but they were hits more than misses.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, because there are a few background, because of how I feel right now, to be honest, the background behind this movie is probably a lot more interesting than the actual movie itself at this point. I was
going to say, you might want to start spitting your facts and wrapping us up. We're getting a little depressing here.
Yeah, but before we move on from that, Grady, what was your favourite part of the movie? Because I like to do this, especially when we've been trashing on a film. I just want to know, what would you actually take away as a really positive thing from this movie that you enjoyed?
Oh, that's a tough question. I didn't take any notes about good parts of the movie. The part with the shrubbery. I don't remember.
Yes, I do. Bring us a shrubbery.
Look, there was very little that I can even point to because... And, we only watched... Unfortunately, I had to delay recording a week, but, I only watched this movie 8 days ago. And I can't tell you any part of this movie that I belly laughed at, that I enjoyed, that was a great part of this movie. And that's a problem.
Fair enough. If it's me, I think the scene where Sir Lancelot, aka John Cleese, is just going on a psychotic rampage through that castle.
Mm-hmm.
Just watching him with with that manic grin on his face, and the bit at the very beginning of the massacre where he looks to be really far away, running towards the castle, and they keep cutting back to him, and he's still really far away. Then they immediately cut to the castle, and he's instantly there, and he just stabs the guard. That's still really funny to me.
Mm. There we go. One positive note to wrap us out of the film discussion on and head into the factoid portion.
There we go. Okay, so there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff on this movie because, again, it's a very famous movie made by a beloved comedy group. I think there's documentaries that have been made on the production of this movie, or at the very least, I remember a while back they had for the 20th anniversary, they had a big Monty Python documentary, and this was a significant portion of that.
Well, TLDR us, Campion.
Yeah, so I'm not going to cover everything, just bits and pieces that I thought were kind of amusing. One of them is, as I mentioned before, this was directed by two people, the two Terrys. Later on, they would both say that both of them directing was an awful idea. They should have just done one of them. Both of them would just made the whole process way too complicated. Because Gilliam was more focused on the technical aspects of the film, whereas Jones was more focused on the comedy, and so they would often clash with one another. And for the remainder of the Pythons films, Terry Jones ended up being serving as the sole director for their future productions. And the only reason the two of them got the job as director was because everyone else in the troupe just flat out refused to do it.
I know that feeling.
John Cleese has stated on record that this movie was probably the most miserable filming experience that he's ever had. Something echoed by pretty much all of the cast members, because they were filming in Scotland. It was cold. It was wet. That armor they're wearing isn't made of metal at all. To make it look like chainmail, it's just painted wool. So they're wearing wool in the middle of, constant rainstorms. So they're drenched and they're cold, and apparently all of them just hated the filming experience. Something that I believe contributes to why this isn't one of their favourite films, because at least they enjoyed filming their other movies.
Yeah, I can definitely see how the environmental conditions is gonna rock you a little bit.
Yeah. This movie was made on a pretty small budget, especially for a movie. I think by today's money, it was made for about $400,000, which, sounds like a lot, but for like a big production move for a feature-length film, that's not a lot. That really is not a lot for a film. So a lot of the jobs the Pythons ended up doing themselves. In fact, a lot of their locations weren't even cordoned off for filming. They literally just oftentimes they would just plop a camera down in a public area and then just pray that no random person would stumble into the scene.
To be fair, if a random person stumbled into the scene, would you really notice?
True.
He's thinking real hard. He's scrolling through those facts. He's trying to figure out what's actually worth.
Yeah, exactly. I gotta pick the best ones. Right before shooting, the Scottish Department of the Environment withdrew all of Monty Python's permission, all of their permits to shoot on location at their actual castles. So the castles you see in the film, those are all privately owned ones that they would literally just go up to find out, is this a privately owned castle? Yep. Okay, let's just go ask the guy if we can shoot there, and it just kind of went from there.
Interesting. I'd like to know why they withdrew all the permits, but hey.
Oh, it's because it's for exactly the reason that you'd think. The exact wording is incompatible with history and fabric of the castles.
Yep.
Which tracks. The primary reason why the police at the end show up and stop the whole before the big battle scene happens is because they'd run out of money.
Yep.
They literally didn't have any money at that very end. So they're like, how do we end this? I don't know, police show up and arrest them. Okay, sounds good.
I 100% see that. I could have guessed that a million miles away. That was we have no way of ending this ending.
Yeah. And most of the people in that army were either members of the production crew or students from the local university. So they just gave them hey, here's £2 sterling, and we'll drive you there, and just run around and scream for a bit. Which, to be fair, they got a free meal out of it. And to be fair, that actually sounds like a pretty great day. If I'm being honest, it sounds like a lot of fun.
It's. I've had worse days.
Yeah, in fact, most of the extras in this movie were either just technicians, stagehands, production assistants. Literally anyone who was on hand, they'd shove in. I remember one, or people from the local towns. I think the Black Knight, when he gets one of his legs chopped off, is played by an actual guy with only one leg. Because they just happened to find one in a nearby town. Hey, do you want to come in? Do you want to be in our movie? And it made it easier when they had to dig the hole, because they only had to dig one hole for one of his legs. So for when he has both of his legs chopped off. So yeah. And as I said before, heaps on this film. It is a very well documented and very beloved film. I'd highly recommend watching. I think there's a documentary on it. I think it was the 20th anniversary. Highly recommend, because I honestly think a lot of the behind the scenes stuff for this movie are more interesting than the actual film. Hang on. Here's the last one. Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, one of the most famous albums of all time. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The band literally donated proceeds from that album to help fund the movie.
Wonder if they had any regrets.
Apparently they didn't. Apparently they all loved all the people who contributed, like Pink Floyd, Genesis, Led Zeppelin. Yeah, they absolutely loved the movie. So
Alrighty.
yeah, so go figure.
Yeah, it should be say. Oh.
Hang on, I know. One more, just last one, I promise. This one, you could figure this one out. The reason why they have the coconuts is because they literally couldn't afford horses. So that's why they had the banging coconuts.
Yeah, that screamed budget issues. I mean, clever comedy writing.
Oh yeah, like if I didn't know that joke was coming, I would have laughed my ass off. Because when he comes out of the fog, clanging the coconuts, genuinely funny. If I didn't know that was coming, I would have laughed really hard.
Yeah, it's kind of saying something that I've laughed more and had more fun with you reading IMDb trivia out to me than I did watching the film. And that's gonna, I think, be my final statement on this film.
Yeah. I mean, this film does have a pretty important legacy. Something that I don't think two, dipshits on a podcast are going to ruin anytime soon. But it's just how we feel, It just didn't do it for us.
It didn't tickle that itch.
Yeah. But anyway, before we close out, just some final words on the legacy and how well this film did. This film did actually manage to make its budget back. For counting for inflation, the film had a budget of $400,000. This is all translated to US, by the way, $400,000 US, and it made a box office of $5 million. So not amazing, but that's actually still pretty decent. But funnily enough, Grady, a lot of the contemporary reviews at the time actually mirror pretty hard what we've been saying in this podcast.
Oh no, no.
Quotes, basically an excuse for set pieces, some amusing, others overdone. Some low spots, but had gags which were non-stop, occasionally inspired, should not be indulged. Although it's giving away too much to say that I particularly liked the sequence. 2.5 stars. 10 minutes of very funny moments and 70 minutes of silence. Does any of this sound familiar, Grady?
Am I a 70s film reviewer?
Yeah, but in recent years, obviously over the years, it's built up a colossal following. This is one of the most celebrated comedy films of all time. I have it here. ABC ran a special a few years ago, Best in Film, the greatest movies of our time. It got second. It was the second best comedy of all time, according to that special, with Airplane being considered the best. And Total Film Magazine ranked it the 5th greatest comedy of all time. A poll done by Channel 4 placed it at 6. So, despite our misgivings, this is still a much, much beloved film.
Look, I can give it all the shit I want.
Yeah.
People still like it, and that's totally fine. Totally okay. You can love whatever film you want to love. I'm not saying you can't love this film. I just personally didn't.
Yeah. And in 2005, it got a stage adaptation, Spamalot, which was like a musical comedy based on the film. And it was actually written by Eric Idle, one of the Pythons. In fact, he would go on. I think he would also go on to do a stage adaptation of Life of Brian as well. I think that was called "He's Not the Messiah. He's a Very Naughty Boy," which is a quote from the film. And Spamalot itself is also a highly acclaimed, very commercially successful stage musical. It was nominated for like 14 Tony Awards or something crazy like that. It had an absolutely massive run. An initial run of 1,500 performances, so there you go. In fact, the musical is even getting a film adaptation, which is apparently currently in production.
You've bombarded me with so many facts.
So many facts, Grady. So many facts. I can hit you with everything.
Your Wikipedia scrolling finger must be so sore.
Oh, dude, I exercise that finger every day, bro. You don't even know.
It's gonna get RSI.
Oh, I'm way past that, dude.
Look, if we're going to pick up Monty Python, we're going to put it on a shelf. We're going to take all of the complaining, all of the 70s humor, and we're going to throw it out the window because our next episode after this, you know what it is?
I've actually completely forgotten.
It's...
I am so deep in Monty Python land right now that I cannot remember.
It is 1970s classic Puffin Stuff.
Oh, that's right. That film I have never heard of in my entire life.
Campion, prepare to copy-paste this episode's format, I'm pretty sure.
Have you seen it yet?
Recently, the latest I've seen it is probably about 10 years ago.
Okay. That's not very recent, Grady.
Look, we're both gonna love it, I'm sure. There's nothing wrong with a 70s comedy. About a child who plays a magical talking flute and summons an imaginary dragon to fight a witch.
I'm looking at this. Oh, that mascot is horrifying.
That's Mr. H.R. Puffin Stuff, and don't you forget it.
Why does he have those colossal bags under his eyes? Does he just not sleep?
Don't spoil yourself, that's next week's movie. Now wrap us up, Campion.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today here on the Cult Movie Podcast, Cult Potato. As always, I have been Campion, joined today by the birthday boy, Mr. Grady Hooker. Hope you all had a fantastic time, and we'll hope to see you all next time.